Intuition is the final frontier of cubing. It's critically important no matter what method you use nor who you are. If you were one of the first people pioneering an original new method to solve the cube in the 80s, you had to use intuition. If you use CFOP, RU, ZZ, Petros, any modern method, intuition comes into play in at least one step, usually two or more. So, that being said, I didn't really think I could learn anything new about intuitive steps after 6 years of cubing, but that wasn't exactly true. If I told you about a method that builds blocks, preserves a lot of things you've already made, and ends in an intuitive step, you'd probably tell me I was thinking about RU. But me, along with some other people, well, we've discovered a method that does all of that way better than RU does. You build far more blocks, you preserve a lot more pieces for longer, and while RU's intuitive step requires you to understand a lot of cube concepts like edge orientation, how the M-slice affects that, which centers you can have facing up. You also need to know 3 cycles and 4 cycles for 4C. You need none of that. This intuitive ending is not only completely foolproof, but as long as you just follow a couple simple rules, you just simply do turns and the cube solves itself. The ending also, by the way, can be cancelled down to become move optimal. Now, if you already thought this was cool for cube theory, then how about we make it a little bit cooler by throwing a completely unique approach to 2-gen reduction in there. And well, we've got a hell of a method on our hands. I'd never expected it to be as deep as it was when I first got into it, but this is a method that me and a lot of people have been working on for a while. This is a method called RUP. The method was first brought to my attention on the 16th of December in 2021 by a friend of mine called Error. He had heard of it in turn through a Q&A video by Rowan Fortier. Q&A video by Rowan. Look, I've seen a lot of cool cube theory and a lot of interesting methods in my time spent cubing, so it's not all too often that a method that I hear about sinks into my psyche, but RUP really did. I can credit that not only to the interesting steps itself, but to the unknown mystery of it. It was sort of a fresh method, but not completely brand new. It was first proposed on the 18th of July in 2018, being worked on until the 14th of May 2019, all by our absolute one-man army of someone whose name I don't want to try and pronounce, so I'll call them by their screen name, Presley. What Error told me in that call was that he'd heard of a method that, and I do my best to quote here, builds a 2x2x3 block, does edge orientation and corner permutation in some strange way. Then you need to build pairs in some obscure, esoteric manner, while also doing some form of corner orientation, and the end result is that you reduce the cube into a bandaged cube, and then you reach a state where you can only do one sequence of moves, and that sequence will lead to the cube being solved. This sounded as interesting and fantastic to me as it did ridiculous. I wanted to sit down and get sunk into learning more, but unfortunately this was all we really had. Nobody could understand anymore. The reason being, the sources we had available were not particularly clear. A GitHub post written fully in traditional Chinese, where Google Translate helped partially. One GitHub that was translated quite roughly into English. Both GitHubs had somewhat functional features. Not only was this a difficult method to grasp in theory, it was difficult to even try to learn about. But I persisted. I wanted to figure out how it works, although at the start I wasn't the most thorough. I skimmed through the pages, just picking up the rough idea of what each step was, not really understanding the intricacies. My average attempt looked like this. Build a 2x2x3 block, like so. Do edge orientation as per Petrus. Place the DR corners and use a PLL to solve corner permutation on the U layer. Solve 2 adjacent U-layer pairs, often by placing and orienting the corners, and then using EPLLs to move the edges. Create a third pair with the DFR corner by hiding one of the existing pairs, spamming the corner into the slot, bringing the pair back, and using either an SRS insert or a UPerm to solve the edge. Corner orientation is supposed to be solved during third pair, and here it was, but if it wasn't, like so, I would use raw flip algs to correct that. And I would almost always run into an edge 3 cycle here. And I would think to myself, man, how cool would it be if I knew commutators, right? I would be able to just solve the cube outright. Little did I know, I already knew how to solve the cube outright. On the 31st of December 2021, I realised I already knew how to solve almost every case after CO. You see, with only 4 edges that could possibly be unsolved, up front, front right, up back, and back right, you'd often run into a last 4 edges or last 3 edges case, and here's how you can solve most of those. This first one is the most obvious to me. It is a case from the Cipher alg set for last 5 edge permutation, where you have the front right edge in the U layer, F2L-1 edge, and corner plane mutation solved, and this case is R', U', S, R2, S', R2, U, R. The next go-to case is the absolute mirror of that case, where you have to insert it into the back, and you can just mirror that alg across the S-axis. Simple enough. Now, if you happen to have the up left edge solved, you can simply do a Z rotation into a U-perm. You can get either U-perm in this case. These are the remaining cases. Now, our last one for edges bad features having the upright edge solved here. You could set up into a pseudo U-perm, but that's more boring. What you can do is either cancel into a rotated Ru last 6 edges case, or depending on your perspective, cancel into a rotated RUS U-perm. The way that you do this is by placing the edge that does not belong in the U layer that is in the U layer in up left, and then you will find the edge that belongs there, in this case it's in the back. You will adjust the R face to bring it up to U, S, R2, S', and then adjust your primary setup. So that's all of the last 3 edge cases, now it's just last 4 edge cases. This case here is the simplest one. I imagine a lot of people know this already. R2, U2, R2, U2, R2. This case, however, had me stumped. It's a setup into a Z-perm, and I didn't really know what to do for this one. So, I put my pride to one side. It's the only case I could not solve intuitively. I loaded up Cube Explorer, and I generated an alg. And it sucks. All you have to do to solve this case is make sure that the edge that swaps with front right is in up left. Do R, U2, S', R', S', R, U2, R', S, R, S, R'. See, that's fine. I called this RUP approach RUP-S, and yes, the S stands for swaggered. While RUP-S was fun, it wasn't RUP. There was none of this mysterious ending step that I'd been promised. So I kept working on discovering the original approach to RUP. I actually found the page for the method on the speed solving wiki, and by god it was bare. But it did promise me a gift, something I thought would be an oasis of clarity amongst a desert of confusion. A video series about RUP from the original creator. I mean, surely this is it. This is what will bring me to fully understand the method. This is the key to unlock everything, right?
We want to do this new pair, and at the same time this 3 corner is twist at the same orient, and empty this layer. We can turn this face. Mirror reflection to use. What is mirror reflection? We consider these 2 all pair the same. We treat this all pair the same, and consider here have a mirror. Here is a mirror. Here is a mirror. We consider here is a mirror. Here is a mirror reflection.
Despite the poor articulation in this video series, I did learn a few things. This wasn't a highly intuitive method. He had memorized different ways of moving the pairs from the U layer into the R layer while affecting other parts of the cube. I realized that the corner orientation during third pair didn't fully solve corner orientation, though at this point I didn't know exactly what it did. I'd failed to interpret the broken English of Presley telling me to twist the corners to the same orient. No shade meant to be thrown at Presley, of course. I can't expect people to be fluent in the language I speak, and the deciphering of the videos in GitHub's only made this whole process all the more interesting. The biggest development by far that this video series heralded, though, was actually completing the ending to a solve. I didn't follow an entire example solve because the video kept jumping around from the cube being in one state to then being in a different one, but I was able to set up to the same case as seen at the end and follow along. The example showed the construction of the fourth pair, a center edge pair, and then the fabled magic ending. Truth be told, I had my doubts about whether or not this method was even possible. How could you just build pairs and set up to a 2-gen state, and then have the only possible running moves just solve the cube? But by the time I reached that ending state, I realized I already knew how to solve this case. Yeah, look, I saw how to solve the pair, and I knew it would skip OLL. I know that from just a fair bit of experience. But then I realized it would already preserve all of the pairs that existed just through looking at it and visualizing the moves. Of course, it has a 2-gen solution, so it preserves corner permutation. The only things that I couldn't guarantee being solved would be this edge and this edge, but they have to be. Everything else is solved, and you can't have just 2 edges swapped. So I got to this magic ending case, and I realized that by just doing RU moves and not breaking blocks, following all of the rules, I already knew how to solve the case. So, it worked. It was real. But there were still steps that we didn't know how to do, so the method wasn't solved yet. The next step into realizing how RUP worked is what I consider to be the first major step. On the 10th of January in 2022, Error messaged me about the third parent corner orientation step. He thought he realized what a section of the guide meant. The corners on the F face all need to be twisted in the same direction to guarantee that you can build the preceding pairs RU gen without disturbing any past pairs. What this meant in practice is that the 3 F face corners of interest, so not down left front because that was solved in the 2-2-3, but the other 3 corners all had to be either completely solved or create a soon or anti-soon case on the F face. I took an interest into this discovery. It seemed like we actually had a footing into understanding the next big step of the method, but I didn't actually look into it in practice until some days later. Enter the 12th of January, and I had time to kill. Around about 2 hours of bus journeys that day meant that I was looking for something to sink my time into, and I ended up remembering what Error told me about corner orientation, so I decided to experiment with it. I got to work on trying to string together a solve that would approximately match the RUP criteria. I solved third pair by hiding the pair and then RU spamming until the corner was oriented. Inside the edge with SRS gen inserts or rotations into U perms, the same as I did in RUP S. But instead of using raw flips to solve corner orientation, I used raw flips to set up to a soon on the F face. A center edge pair was already solved and I already had a 4th pair, so it looked like I was at the ending step already. 2 pair skips, what can I say, I'm feeling lucky. But now was the moment of truth. If this mysterious magic method worked, and if I understood it correctly, this would work. So, could I figure it out? Completely unique setup, no guide, no constructed solve. I think I've set up to the last step. Does it work? Yes, it works. A different, unique ending case created by following all of the rules of RUP with my own setup. This method is the real deal. But I wasn't getting to the ending step properly. It was a RUP ending with a scuffed setup. So I shared my knowledge with the other RUPpers and I named it Scuffed RUP. Seemingly motivated by this step forward and having a consistent way to get deeper into the solve, SciKE got to work the very next day producing this sheet for 4th pair. It follows the English guide, not the Chinese one, and it relays what you need to do while staying pretty brief. This has since become the go-to reference for solving 4th pair. The general process looks like this. You gather 3 pairs on the U layer, usually using U'(R2) if you have all the pairs solved in their position. Basically, just make sure you have all 3 pairs on the U layer and that up back right corner is not part of any of those solved pairs. Now, find the edge that will pair with the corner for 4th pair. The corner for 4th pair, by the way, is now in down front right, so you look at that as your reference. Now, depending on where the edge that you want to pair with it belongs, use a different alg. After that step, the edge will have moved into up left. From there, you need to look at where it will actually belong and where it will pair with the corner. If it belongs in down right, one alg will just end the step outright. If it belongs in front right, MoYu will place the edge in back right where R2U will solve the step. There you go. Fourth pair is now a solved step, and we're further into understanding RUP than we've ever been before. And after some experimentation with Scuffed RUP, I came to another realization. There were only 4 unique ending cases in the final step. Cases I just labelled A and B, and their respective mirrors across the Z-axis. More on Z-axis mirrors will come later. Now, believe it or not, the 3 people looking into RUP still had very different ideas about the method. We understood different parts to different degrees and paid more attention to different parts of the solve and different resources. SciKE spent most of his time with the English guide, Era studied the Chinese guide, and I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on in the videos. Collectively, we were able to hack something together, but individually, not quite enough. This really came into play on the 16th of January when I was in a voice call with Era. He'd been working on an example solve using outcubing.net and following the Chinese guide. I don't know how long he'd been working on it, but it seemed like it was a little while. You see, Era was working on decoding the Chinese approach to third pair. Third pair in CO was a very tough step for us to understand. Nobody in the group had fully grasped it yet. We only had the scuffed approach that I came up with that used raw flips to set up to a soon. However, after some experimentation and a little bit of frustration, Era thought he might have had it, although he didn't really know how to tell. So I asked him to send me the ACN link, and I just put the pairs back into their spots to check, and CO was solved. Era had cracked it, even if it was only once this time, but I'm sure he could do it again. Miraculously, he managed to skip both fourth pair and centre edge pair, just like I did during my Scuffed RUP approach. So I recognised this and I sent him the new ACN link back with the pairs put back in place, and I told him he was at the end. And I sat in the call for a moment and I watched Era, who didn't know the case, didn't recognise how to solve it outright, sit there and intuitively solve it by following all the rules of RUP. RU only, no blocks broken. He just paid attention, started out with an R move because it was the only valid move, then a U because he felt like that particular direction was right, and so on and so forth, and in 7 moves, he'd solved the cube. Step by step, we were hacking together more and more of the method. Every day, getting closer to actually understanding how to use this. However, when we sent SciKE the reconstruction, he'd noticed that the third pair and CO step didn't really align with his beloved English tutorial. It was from this observation that we realised the Chinese and English guides were actually very, very different. We realised that these 2 guides were written at the same time, but the Chinese guide proceeded to get developed more and more over time, whereas the English guide got left behind. So since the Chinese guide was more updated, we decided that the approach detailed within that guide would be the real RUP, but this wasn't the last big step we'd made that day. While I was in that VC with Era that I mentioned earlier, he asked if I solved edge orientation and corner permutation the way the author intended. As it turns out, I actually didn't. Era described the overall approach for the step to me, but I turned to the Chinese guide to fully learn the step. As it turns out, it wasn't that painful. You solve edge orientation, Petra style, but leaving 2 edges misoriented. If you happen to skip EO and you have all your edges oriented, don't worry, that can get handled in a minute. We'll cover this now. The second part is the fun part. It's the alien line section, and it's what the step's named after. Firstly, you take your 2 remaining D-layer corners and you put them in the D-layer. They don't have to be oriented or even permuted correctly, just if they belong in the D-layer, put them in the D-layer. Now, you mentally twist them to be oriented, and you pay attention to their relation on the side. The relation between these corners will either be solved or opposite, and then you pay attention to the relationships between all the U-layer corners as well. By doing this, you'll recognize a pair of corners that stand out, so you'll either have like 2 solved and a diag, or like 2 solved and adjacent, something like that, or 2 diag and a solved. So, sometimes there won't be any corners that stand out like this. You'll have all the same set, like 3 solved or whatever, or 3 diag. That's fine, again, that can get handled later, but there will almost always be a pair of outstanding corners. Now from here, you need to pair the misoriented edges with the outstanding corners in a kind of J or an L shape on the R face. As long as the 2 outstanding corners are on up front right and up back right, and you have a misoriented edge between them and the other misoriented edges touching one of the outstanding corners, you have it correct, because it'll be in a J or an L shape, and you'll be able to solve edge orientation with 3 moves the way you would in Petrosea, like F prime UF, BRB prime, or whatever, but it will also solve corner permutation this time. So this understanding pinned down another step in RUP. We can do 2x2x3, we can solve the EOCP at the same time, completely simultaneously, using the alien line step. Then we can do the first 2 pairs. We cheat our way through 3rd pair, use SciKE's 4th pair, pray for a center edge skip, and finish the solve. We're getting close. We're getting really close. It was about time for something to go wrong, and it was around this time we realized we'd made a mistake. Don't worry, we're not going back on any of the progress we've made. We just have to throw out some cool theory. When I was first introduced to RUP by Error, he showed me a video by a YouTube channel called Bandage Group. The video was about bandage cube theory, which was relevant as RUP is a way to reduce a 3x3 to a bandage cube. The video itself talks about how the bandage cube needs to be reduced into the correct shape by putting the correct pieces in the correct location, though this won't necessarily solve the puzzle as the stickers can still be in the wrong place. Bandage Group showed, using some sick graphs, that you can perform sequences of moves that will loop around the graphs and result in the same shape of puzzle. If you traverse around the graph in a long enough, non-trivial manner, you'll change how the puzzle looks and the location of the stickers, while you return to the correct shape. So, through this, we had thought that the bandage state of RUP would have a sort of Hamiltonian circuit, devil's algorithm of sorts, that allows us to repeat a certain longer sequence of moves, and at some point during that sequence the cube would solve itself. So we don't even have to use our intuition and look at the cube during the ending, we just hop onto the algorithm and go. What we failed to consider is that the RUP method doesn't reduce to any one particular shape of bandage cube. It has 4 possible shapes that it can reduce to, due to where the center edge pair is made, and due to which 3rd pair is made. So this algorithm cannot exist because there are 4 different bandage cubes that we reduce to, not just 1. This is the same reason we have the 4 cases in Scuffed RUP. Because we're forcing all the pieces to be permuted in the same position, we get to see all the 4 different bandage cases, so case A and B are 2 different bandage cases, and then the mirrors of them on the z-axis are just that, and those are the other 2 bandage cube cases we can get. So, while this was a sad day, the next day was a bit more promising. There was a development. Error had written out an entire paragraph teaching us how to use the Chinese 3rd pair guide. This was big news because SciKE and myself were frankly a bit too scared and confused to decode that particular step. It turns out the step is rather simple. It just uses 3 stages of recognition, a table of fully directly solvable cases, a way to mirror the cube over the z-axis by using mirror reflections, and the symmetry that's present as a result of the 2x2x3 with EO and corner permutation solved. Said table uses multiple ARS to cover more cases with less elements, and that's full table to know what to refer to. On top of this, you have to be able to mirror the elements, but it's not traditional mirroring where you do it from right to left, and it's not inversing either. You actually just take every U and turn it into an R, and the direction actually stays the same. So if a U went to an R, it would be U to an R. If an R prime went to a U, it would be R prime to U prime. Baby stuff, really. So that's it. Error had figured that out on himself, and the only missing step was the center edge pair. So I decided I would just sit down and finally put this method to rest. I'd learn it. And it turns out it wasn't that hard. I guess it was just the last one left because it was the most insignificant, it seemed. So you have the option of making a new pair using either the up back or back right edge, no matter what. And as it turns out, it's not just a center edge pair because the pair it's connected to matters. The up back edge, if we were to solve it, would be considered a block that involved the up back left pair. Or if we were to solve the back right edge, it would include the down back right pair. So we're really just using the center edge pair as a way to expand one of our existing pairs into a 1x2x2. The guide on Presley's site just shows every location that either edge could be, assuming that you've collected 3 pairs on one layer, either U or R, and it also shows how to solve the case. A fun thing to note is that the solution to this doesn't have to restore all of the pairs back to their original locations at the end, meaning that the real ending of RUP is not restricted to the 4 cases shown in Scuffed RUP. You actually have a funky looking cube to go and solve yourself using your intuition. It starts in a state where the cube is scrambled seemingly entire with RU gen moves, and yet can be solved with just simple alternating RU that don't break blocks. It's beautiful. So that's the base method, a 2x2x3, unique 2-gen reduction method that uses EO-2 to make the solving of corner permutation and edge orientation both efficient and simultaneous. 2 pairs built on top, a third creatively constructed while making sure every remaining corner is twisted in the same direction, using a whole bunch of tables to recognize and solve each case, a flowchart to finish up fourth pair, an edge tied to the center, then its pair, followed by the promised land of all cubing method steps. A foolproof step in which turning the cube and not breaking things just solves it. It just solves it. And as well as this mystical ending step, the method preserves everything it creates throughout the solve, barring breaking the 2x2x3 block for one move during the alien line. Although, a bit of a side note about that ending step, it is possible to run into a dead end, where the only move you can make that won't break blocks will undo your last move. This will be due to a choice you made earlier in that final step. There will have been a point where you either could have done like U or U prime or R prime. The move that you did led to a dead end. You're a fool. So you made the wrong choice. All you have to do is backtrack until you notice you have multiple options for what you can do, and take the other option. It helps if you happen to write down your ending solution, because if you run into a dead end and you include the backtrack and everything, you can cancel the solution down. And the fun thing about these solutions, they're move optimal. Oh, and regarding the center edge pair step, it can be done intuitively as well. As long as you don't break any pairs, you can just connect the edge with its center and then connect the pair that it needs for the 1-2-2 onto the edge and the center, and there you go. So I would like to end off this video by showing you this clip of me doing a RUP solve. This is an example solve. And I'm going to show how it preserves pieces by placing blue tack on blocks that I built. Not the 2-2-3, because that would just be a bit of a waste. But I'm also going to talk about some more stuff, so this is it then. The method is solved. So now it's possible to fully understand and create solves, but we couldn't let that be the end, you know? So those fixed pairs that we make at the start are the first two. First thought was, could we solve any other set of power law pairs? Because the way the author wrote it out is that we have to solve pairs where, you know, the corners have the B face color in common. But could we solve these pairs like with the L face color in common? Or R or F? It turns out yes, we just have to deconstruct rules for corner orientation recognition, and sometimes use an ALG shown in the English guide to sort of re-roll what corner orientation we get. This is interesting because, you know, changing the recognition is easy enough, you know, a blue color group just becomes colors on the R or the L face, orange color group just becomes F face, yellow color group just becomes U face. That's simple. The corner re-rolling is an interesting quirk, because what we effectively have is corner orientation and edge orientation solved on two different axes, and yet this solve sort of exists in the crux in the middle where these axes sort of interact with each other. It's really interesting, and the result is that it's not possible for every corner orientation to make the fourth pair. So you have to do an ALG to reroll the fourth pair. It goes like R, U2, R prime, U2, R, U, R prime, U. And that just changes the orientation in a RUP friendly manner. And it preserves all the pieces you made. Again, more on that in a later video. And you know, as it turns out, despite us not being able to apply the Bandage cube theory from earlier, we can still use graphs of states in RUP. Error has put a lot of time into drawing out really beautiful, elaborate graphs for just a few instances of the final step. As it turns out, you know, finding any way to navigate around the graph leads to the optimal solution. Who would have thought? You know, you can cancel it down. Finally, you know, RUP, or to give it its full acronym, RUP-M. Yeah, there's an M at the end. RUP-M. It actually stands for something. First off, RU for, you know, RU reduction, pairs, and mirrors. This isn't the method's final form. There's a tab on the GitHub for PRUM, P-R-U-M, which preserves even more, but we haven't looked there yet. It seems like it's just a different approach to 2-2-3, where you make one of the U-layer edges and put it like at the down front of the 2-2-3, and then you sort of swap it out, so that technically preserves more, and it doesn't break anything, but that's something for another day. I'm tired, man. So there it is. There's a story of how I helped, alongside with Error and SciKE, to decipher the most mysterious and possibly complex human solving method for the 3x3. I would obviously like to give huge shout outs to SciKE and Error for making this all possible. Like, genuinely, I could not have done this on my own. This was a group effort. And if anyone here has watched all the way through here, shout out to you as well, because I'm only halfway through the script, and like I've only edited halfway through the script, and I'm already 20 minutes in. This is shaping up to be a big video. My average viewer retention is like 1 minute 20. So if you've watched this far, thank you, man, for padding my retention stats. Let's go.